The Mafia's daughter, her diary held more death than secrets. She had always kept a diary. Even when she was young, before the men in dark suits surrounded her father's house like sharks waiting for a bleeding victim to appear, before the nights she spent hiding under her desk with the other children, while her dad negotiated with the vultures outside, even then she wrote. She wrote of princesses who fought dragons and damsels who saved themselves. In those stories, there was no room for men in dark suits, or for fear that tasted like stale smoke and regret. She was 16 now, old enough to be useful, her father said, though he would never admit it. Was out of love for his only child that he made sure that his daughter knew the family business. He gave her books about poisons, taught her how to hold a gun without shaking, showed her where to find their enemies' hideouts, and every night, before he left the house, he'd give her a small dose of truth serum, enough to make her dreams vivid, to make her imagination feel real. "It will help you," he said, "to remember everything." But the diary was filled with stories long before her father taught her how to survive in his world. Now its pages were filled with nightmares, with memories of blood and screams and the lingering scent of gunpowder. The ink bled onto her fingertips, staining them black. It was the same color as the tar that dripped from the windows of the houses where the enemies were kept. When she was little, she used to ask her mother why they had to keep so many enemies. "'Cause we don't make mistakes," her mother would reply, her voice like ice shards. "And our enemies are the ones who make us pay for theirs." But she didn't understand. Not then. Not when she dipped her toes into this world and realized it was vast and terrifying and beautiful all at once. She had always been good at keeping secrets. She could look at people and tell if they were lying, where their weaknesses were, what made them tick. She used those skills to stay alive, to protect her own secrets. Because the thing was, she wasn't just a mafia princess, she was also an undercover agent. Her father made sure that everyone in her life was as dangerous as he was, that every single one of them had something to hide. Her mother was cold and distant, but she was good at reading people. Her brother, silent and brooding, was excellent with explosives. Her cousin could make anyone talk. Her uncles could get their hands dirty, and her aunts could buy their way out of any trouble. Everyone except her father had something to hide, something they could never talk about, and so they talked to her instead, telling her things they could never say out loud. She heard rumors about the rival families, saw their ghosts haunting the edges of the parties her father hosted. Once she found a picture of her parents as young lovers, a picture that looked like it hurt. The past seeped out of these people, poisoning the present. She understood that because she, too, had a past that haunted her, a past she buried in the diary. In its pages, she wrote of a normal life, sun-drenched meadows and careless laughter, of first kisses and second chances, of a family that ate dinner together and didn't have to hide under tables. That family didn't exist, not really. And yet she felt closer to them in those pages than to the one that did. She had a talent for languages, and her father put it to good use. He made her fluent in Italian, in Spanish, in French. When she was 12, he sent her to Switzerland to learn German. At school, she excelled in her classes, especially in literature. She wrote stories, poems, even scripts for plays, all in German.
Oh.
No one ever suspected that she wasn't just a rich girl with too much time on her hands. By the time she turned 16, she was fluent in 5 languages and knew how to use every single one of them to get what she wanted. She could blend in anywhere. She could disappear. That's what her father liked about her. That's why he took her everywhere with him. They flew around in private jets, stayed in hotels with the best security, always had armed bodyguards close behind. When he was in a meeting, she sat outside, listening at the door, learning things she didn't want to know. Sometimes she waited for hours, sometimes for days. And when her father finally emerged, his face pale and drawn, she knew that another enemy was lying dead somewhere. She knew that her father had made another mistake. She didn't judge him for it, not really. All she did was write down everything he said, everything she heard. One day her father called a truce with his enemies. They agreed to meet and negotiate. The first time in years, her father smiled, and she knew that this time it was real. Maybe they could finally start living normal lives. Maybe they could finally stop running. On the day of the meeting, they loaded her father's private jet with gifts, with weapons, and with cameras. Her job was to stay in the back and film. If anything went wrong, they needed proof. She sat there for hours, watching her father joke and shake hands. But something was off. The other men seemed too eager to please, too ready to agree. When her father finally came out, his smile was gone and his eyes were sharp. She knew that something was wrong. But when she asked him, he just shook his head and told her to erase the footage. He didn't tell her what was wrong, didn't tell her that one of the men she'd seen was an undercover cop, didn't tell her that her whole life was about to change. As soon as they landed, men with guns surrounded the jet. Her father didn't resist, simply raised his hands and surrendered. She watched him go, watched him disappear into the crowd of reporters and flashing lights. Then she did the only thing she could do. She escaped. She knew the city like the back of her hand. She changed clothes, got rid of her bags, erased all traces of herself. She knew she would be hunted, but she was good at hiding. She could stay away for months, maybe years. But as she slipped into the shadows, she thought about her father and she wondered, was this the end of the story or just the beginning? For the first time since she learned how to read, she opened a book that had nothing to do with her father's world. It was a fairy tale. And as she read about the princess who ran away from her kingdom, she smiled. Maybe someday she would find her own prince. Maybe someday she would live happily ever after. But until then, she had a diary to fill up. The cops found her father guilty. His empire fell apart without him. His friends and allies abandoned him. The rivals made sure of that. But no one ever found her. She disappeared into thin air, leaving no trace of herself behind. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding. She'd reach for the diary on her nightstand, open it, and write about the dream. Years passed, the entries became fewer. She moved from city to city, country to country, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. Then one day she stopped writing. The diary was full, filled with more death than secrets. She was good at keeping secrets now, so good that she could bury them deep inside herself. She could pretend that none of it ever happened. She could pretend that she wasn't the Mafia princess. But sometimes at night, when the rain was falling and the wind was cold, she'd hear the echoes of gunshots and see the ghosts of the men she loved and lost. And she would wonder if they ever found her, if they were looking for her. If they were wondering what happened to the little girl who wrote stories about dragons and princesses. She was still that little girl, lost and alone in a world that was too big and too dangerous for her. But now, she was also something else. She was the Mafia princess, the one who got away.